All right. Well, I would like to welcome Nicole Solomos to the podcast. Nicole is a family practice doctor in New York, right?
Yes. Well,
That's
I do
correct.
sports medicine and lifestyle medicine. I don't.
That's right. I just know that you and I had similar training, at least up to that. So
Yeah.
I love this idea of lifestyle medicine. It's so, it's just intriguing, and more medicine should be revolving around that, if you ask me.
Mhm.
So, Nicole, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell everybody what your training is and what your coaching practice is.
So as you said, I trained in family medicine for my residency, and then I did a sports medicine fellowship. So I am non-surgical sports medicine, primary care sports medicine, by trade. And I work in an orthopedic setting. I've always worked in an orthopedic setting since graduating fellowship. And I also have my board certification in lifestyle medicine. And so I have started to incorporate that into my practice as well. Seeing musculoskeletal complaints oftentimes can lead to really lively discussions and even exercise prescriptions and talking about nutrition and talking about eating whole foods and getting social interaction, so it's been a nice, I would say, intermingling of specialties. And I'm only just beginning to develop that, I believe. And in coaching, I really am focusing on midlife women and beyond. And just having focus around feeling better in their body. And to be even more focused than that, I am focusing on muscle and building, if you're still at a stage where you can build, maintaining, starting where you are, and trying to slow the loss of muscle. So I am highly interested in women and their muscle mass too. So
So that's really interesting to me on a personal level. I just want to hear, what would be your biggest recommendation, kind of overlapping that muscle component, both building and maintaining, of course. And then also, I feel like the older, I turned 49 this weekend, and the more birthdays I get under my belt, the more I notice the soreness in my muscles feel differently. And the soreness is just different than what it was. So I guess not just for building and maintaining, but also for that part where there is some discomfort in exercise and in the building of muscles. What are you seeing as far as lifestyle crossing over? Like, what's the biggest thing that we as humans are doing that kind of get in the way of that for us?
Yeah, I think we're just not focusing enough on our muscle.
Mm.
Listen, I'm 49 too, so I'm older than you. But so like we grew up in the same age, right? And I was an athlete, and yet so I was an athlete, and after organized sports were done, which really has never been for me because I still play organized soccer.
I
Um,
love that.
Organized pickup, whatever, you know what I'm saying. But sport,
Hmm.
even when, like, let's say when I finished college, well, I still played soccer, but I became that really cardio focused, because when you're not doing the college sport or the organized sport, whatever, at whatever level, you're not practicing every day. You're
Hmm.
not, so what I'm saying is that for people that haven't been involved in organized sport, so I become one of those people when I stop, when I graduate college. And so my focus for many, many years was more cardio than strength, right?
Yes,
I mean, I
yes.
think I'm blessed. Everybody's different, and I think we have to realize that. But I think I was particularly, you know, blessed by the fact that I had pretty good muscle tone as in my youth. And so did I do some strength training? I did. I especially remember being in medical school and doing some strength training. I wish I had done more, to be honest, now
Hmm.
that I'm older. But I had really good muscle tone. So having a good base has been helpful for me. Uh,
Hmm.
but to answer your question, to get back to answering your question, I think that's where people our age, a little bit younger than us, I would say, even the people that are in their 30s, us, and then people older than us, just we didn't have the knowledge. We didn't realize how important strength was. We used cardio as a way to manage our weight. There was a
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, there was a focus on thinness for us rather than
Health.
health and
Yeah.
body composition, right?
Yeah,
Even for,
absolutely.
I mean, I would say even for people that know, like, I mean, I'm in organized sport. I know it's important to be strong, right? You have
Hmm.
to, so so yeah, I think that's where we've learned. And
So
and this is where we're gonna go, from now.
do you feel like if and this kind of, we had about this discussion about body composition and strength training and exercise in middle age. Do you think that women, like those of us, raised 70s, children of the 70s, and even earlier, because the women that were born in the 60s and the 50s were exposed to the same fat
Yeah.
phobic 80s and 90s that all of
Yes.
us were.
Yes.
Um, and we were focused. I mean, it was all the sweating with the oldies. It was Jane Fonda. It was
Yeah.
aerobics. It was all of that.
Hmm.
And it was very cardio heavy. Is there a way, can you regain the loss of muscle gaining or the loss of muscle building really in those younger years? Can you gain that back or can you make up for that loss?
You can make up for it. I do believe that. Unfortunately, as women, I mean, not unfortunately, I don't want to use any negative connotation, but okay, when we hit perimenopause, a lot of stuff starts changing, with our
Hmm.
hormones. And the only way we realize it, and we still may not realize it, and I'm included in this group, is that um we start feeling different. And just like you explained, like, yeah, it's very different the way I feel
Hmm.
um when I play soccer or when I work out or whatever, as opposed to when I was in my 20s and 30s, right? Um, so can we regain it? It's hard as women when we start losing our estrogen.
Hmm.
I think we're more focused on, trying to maintain. Do I believe that there's some building that can be done? I do. I think though it's more about the recomp from, maybe the body fat percentage as opposed to lean mass, right? So
Yeah.
just like when we talk about food, I don't know if you've heard of this concept, but you kind of crowd out the less nutrient dense foods by
Sure.
having more
Sure.
greens on your plate, right? So I think that's kind of the way you can think of your body as you get
Mm.
older, as women, when we lose our estrogen, because as soon as you start losing your estrogen, we could be, if we're not cognizant, 1% lean body mass per year. We can lose
Hmm.
10% per decade, like, and you lose strength even faster than that. So,
Hmm.
strength, you know, and, there are some simple ways that you can gauge it, but like, can you open a can, as opposed to 10 years before that, are you losing that? And that's a pretty easy way to gauge. If you start going to your significant others, or whoever, to open a jar instead of opening it yourself when you could
Yeah.
before, like, so um but building is tough when we get into
So do you
perimenopause and
feel
beyond.
like when we get into that perimenopausal years that we need to be kind of that crowding component, right? Like not
Yeah,
crowding out our muscle work with cardio work, but
right.
really starting to because even insulin resistance, I just heard science behind this. Muscle composition is far more effective on reversing insulin resistance than
Very,
cardio
yes.
is.
And
Yeah.
that's the whole reason, like, we're going to get into the sugar, but
Yeah.
that's where you're, you're, that's where you're going to fight the insulin resistance is with muscle.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
And
huge
yes,
play.
and
Yeah.
so, and that's the reason, right? So we may not end up with bulky muscles, which some of
Hmm.
us want. Like I like muscle, right? But some of us don't, and I don't think you have to worry about that. You know, if you haven't started there, then I
Hmm.
think you're gonna become like you're not gonna have bulging, bulky muscles, but you are going to increase your insulin receptors on your muscle, on your lean mass. You're going to have a greater percent lean mass compared to your fat mass, right? And
Hmm.
so that's where it's going to change. And that's where you're going to really have so many benefits because insulin resistance is, I mean, I don't think it's just a thought in my head. It's the key. It's what starts going wrong in
Right. Yeah. I think they're
menopause and
starting to
beyond.
realize that it's really I always teach insulin resistance like it's the trunk of a tree and all the
Yeah.
diseases are just the branches off of that
Yes.
trunk. So absolutely. So what is the biggest tip that you give women, the women you work with, that age group for that recomposition? Like I guess, what are the steps that you would give them to
Well, I
getting
think,
to that?
yeah, I think to be very basic about it, resistance train 2 to 3 times a week, if not more. I don't think 4 times a week is a bad thing.
Do you
Um,
mean resistance train full body or do you mean doing 4 times a week different muscle groups?
yeah,
Okay.
I would say
Yeah.
either. I mean, because you might be talking about somebody who hasn't done any, right? So
Right.
you have to start where you are. And again,
Okay.
when I say resistance training, I don't mean that you have to lift heavy weights. I think it's beneficial if you can, with
Okay.
good form and everything. I think it's something to look forward to if you choose, but you start with body weight. You start with modifying and you start where you are and you start
Yeah.
the amount of time that you can do. Keeping in mind that you don't have to like it. You just have to like the result. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so resistance training. And I think it's pretty clear that we should be very that we should increase our protein and really be careful about getting a lot of protein. Um, I think that the recommended daily allowance is most likely too low and
Hmm.
we should get more. I don't want to, I mean, I'm not a researcher, but it looks like a gram per pound or maybe a little bit less of ideal body weight, by the way. Um, ideal body weight, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, it's hard to get that, right?
Sure. I
Um,
struggle to get that every
I
day.
do
I
too.
struggle big time. And I don't really feel very well when I'm pushing that much protein. I feel overfull. It's just really unpleasant. We talk about that a lot in my group about because I always tell them you should be shooting for at least a gram per pound of body weight. Like that's what you
Mhm.
should really be shooting for. And some studies even show up to like 2 grams, which seems ridiculous.
I know, and I've had some pushback when I posted that on
Oh
social
yeah, yeah,
media.
yeah. The nephrologists get really excited.
Well, 2 grams, I said a gram per pound, people will argue with that, but I don't,
Yeah,
I mean, and then the plant versus animal protein,
sure.
that's another argument. I mean, I don't want to argue with anybody. I just think you should try to,
The
um,
fact is, we clearly need more.
yeah,
You can
and
split hairs over one or
right,
two, or animal or plant, but we need more. Yeah,
yeah, and and there are plenty of people that are plant-based that have
doing great.
good
Yeah,
muscle mass, right? So,
yeah,
um, yeah, so I think those are the two things that I'm hitting hard with midlife and beyond females is and like I said, if you're in your 70s or 80s, it's not too late.
Oh, I
It's
love
not
that.
too late because,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, you're well past menopause, but you're well into menopause, I should say. But um, it's more, and even beyond the metabolic health that we're talking about, it's also the way you feel, right? It's
Mhm.
self-efficacy. I think that's huge. You know,
Yes.
I have a course and I have many videos where I teach people exercises that they can do to increase leg strength, to get up from the floor,
Yeah.
to be able
Hmm.
to pick up a grandchild, to be able to uh, step off of a curb without falling and breaking your hip, which is
A big deal.
really not
Yeah.
an injury that anybody should have at that age,
Yeah.
right? It's really can lead to a downward spiral pretty quickly. So, you know, it's not, I think the metabolic part of it is very important, even in your
Hmm.
70s, 80s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It's super important as well, but it's also the self-efficacy and the way you'll feel.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's so spot on. That's so spot on. So the two big things for that kind of strength training and muscle recomposition or body recomposition is really we should be doing muscle or weight work 3 at least times a week. And then we really need to give our body the building blocks in the form of 1 gram at least per body or per pound of body weight for protein, right?
yeah, it would
Yeah.
be nice. Some
Yeah.
people say, point eight. Yeah, listen, as long as you increase it, you're feeling well. I think that there are ways that we can monitor that. They're not very cost effective at this point. From what I see, so I don't want to just like make a blanket statement that everybody should have a glucometer, like a continuous
Yeah.
glucose monitor, or there are other things you can measure, but they may, not. I don't think everybody can access them easily. So,
Yeah,
it
and
could
you know
be.
what? In the end, like the monitoring, at least in my mindset, the monitoring is not as important as the doing of the
That's
thing
right.
that is healthy, right?
That's
Like
right.
I always tell my clients because they'll be like, "Oh, my blood sugar didn't follow, and I ate so clean and so few carbs and yada yada." And I'm like, "Well, yeah, that's the healthy part thing. That's the healthy thing in life. It's not the blood sugar that follows. That will eventually catch up. The
Yeah.
healthy thing is that we ate carrots and chicken and not Pop Tarts." So,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Right. I mean,
So.
and that I would say I probably left out one of the other like generalities that I really promote to my clients and patients is really not to eat processed food as much as
Yeah.
possible. Yeah, enjoy life, and I try to teach people how they can enjoy eating and being with others without processed food. So,
Yeah. And that is a great lead in because I do want to talk about sugar. I know we kind of touched base on autoimmunity. And if we have time, we can dive into that. If not, we can have you back on the podcast and we can dive into that. But I want to talk about sugar because I think you have some really interesting information that I at least had never heard of as far as the history of sugar. But I also think that and I agree, like, and I don't mean to sound super hyperbolic, but I'm like, processed foods, that food will kill you. That food will make you sick. And I
yeah.
do absolutely believe that. I know it's a pretty polarizing thought because there is this significant mantra amongst the diet mentality that is a little bit's okay. Some of it's okay. And in my mind, I'm like, I don't know that any of it's okay. It'll kill you.
Correct.
But um, so let's talk about the history of sugar. And then I do want to talk about like the 3 negative impacts that you see on human beings when they're consuming sugar and processed foods. Really, let's processed sugars. I'm not talking about apples and oranges. I'm talking about Pop Tarts.
Right.
Yeah.
So you want to know about the history, right? You want to know a little bit
Hmm.
about the history. So yeah, I have a whole module on the history of sugar. And so sugar originally it came from two sources, way back, sugarcane and the sugar beet, right? So
Hmm.
um when it was first discovered, and like, so I'm sure you know this, and a lot of people probably
I
do, but
don't.
okay. But well, you do know that sugar, when we ingest it,
Sure.
causes a dopamine rush, right?
Yeah.
Just like
Binds
anything
the
else.
mu opioid receptor. And
Yeah.
yeah.
Just
Yeah.
like drugs, just like sex, just like anything that we enjoy, right? It
Hmm.
works on the dopamine reward system. So when sugar was first discovered from the sugar beet, from the sugar cane, it was used medicinally as well
Mm.
as recreationally, like a drug for a high. So and I guess it was introduced into food as well, but they were using it that way more than in food, right? So it was
Yeah. Yeah. It wasn't a food additive. It was a
right,
fun.
right. And then it became what it is today over time. So um what else do I want to so okay, so that was, the origins of sugar way back when, right? And so, but in North America, and specifically in the United States, what I can tell you is that in the 60s was the first time that anybody said anything about maybe sugar wasn't good for us, or
Hmm.
that it may contribute to weight gain and some diseases like diabetes. And then again in the 80s, oh, well, you remember. So
Yeah.
that's when we had
Yeah.
our fat-free craze, right?
Fat free. And then, gosh, maybe sugar free too. Make it all. Take it. Yeah.
Macros, right? But fat-free. And there was actually
Yes.
a statement that was put out that said that fat was more dangerous, or
Yeah.
uh, that it was had more of a negative impact on our health than sugar.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
Fat was absolutely demonized in this
yes,
country in the
I mean,
80s.
I
Absolutely.
remember eating fat-free everything,
Yeah.
everything.
It was
I would,
fine that I ate a box of fudge sickles because they
yes,
were fat free. So it was
yes,
fine.
it was
Yeah.
all right, right? And I
Hmm.
think you and I were the same age, um, so like we said before, we were with guys, like thinness was really like
The
the
Kate
goal,
Mosses. Yes. Yes.
right?
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
so we didn't. I don't know about you, but like I told you, I was an athlete and everything. I didn't see any change in like I wasn't gaining weight or anything, but here is a perfect example of okay, I didn't see it morphologically in my body, but it just wasn't good, right? I
Well,
mean,
I can remember in college having episodes of hypoglycemia.
oh yeah, yeah.
So I know looking back at that, that was insulin resistance that was happening in my body. It was not like I mean, and of course I can even remember like, oh, hypoglycemia, like I'm so far away from being diabetic. And looking back, it was like, no,
Right.
I was a lot closer to being diabetic. Yeah.
I mean, I remember really having serious energy crashes. I mean, I remember it more in college,
Yes, I
you
do too.
know, like I couldn't keep my eyes open, and I really do think that probably had a lot to do with that, right?
Yeah.
And in high school, I definitely had a lot of stomach upset, and
Hmm.
things like that. So I think it was affecting us. The fat-free thing for me wasn't until college, but so I think it was affecting us, maybe not morphologically because of our youth, but
Yeah. Yeah.
health. Yeah, totally.
Definitely. Definitely.
Yeah. So anyway, so that was the 80s. We had and I totally remember, I don't know if you do, you probably do, but the food guide pyramid that we had,
Yes.
right? And so what was at the base of that food guide pyramid? The base of it
Grains,
was grains. Yeah.
breads and
6 to
grains. Yep.
11 6 to 11 servings a day.
It's
And
no
they were
wonder we
talking
all got diabetic.
right. They were talking about bread, cereal, bread. I mean, what? So, and they weren't saying, oh, don't eat the sugary cereals or anything, no, that's what it
No,
was.
they're fortified.
Right. Yeah.
God, it
So
was a mess.
that was the base of the food guide pyramid. So, okay. So that's the 80s now. And a lot of the artificial sweeteners came
Yeah.
about,
Yeah.
then as well. So that was a super bad combination. So artificial sweeteners, we know now, really affect our gut. Sugar does
Hmm.
too, in a negative way. It
Yeah.
can really decrease that diversity of
The
the
gut
microbiome.
microbiome. Yeah.
So, like, this was all happening. And then in the early 2000s, it did start to shift back to more like of the natural, real sugar, honey, agave nectar, things like that. So, and now we have, in place of the food guide pyramid, we have My Plate. So My Plate
Sure.
is a picture of a plate, and it shows you how to divide the plate. And it doesn't, and half of the plate is green leafy vegetables. So again, that's an example of crowding out.
Sure.
So anyway, so we've made progress. People like you and I, and there are many people that are really bringing this to the forefront. So I think, progress is being made. And it's really, another thing that I wanted to mention was back in the 60s, along with
Mm.
the food guide pyramid and, some of the things that we've talked about, was the fact that there were 10 major food companies, food,
Yeah.
in North America that still own almost everything,
Hmm.
put a lot of commercials out there, have a lot of money, own the produce, even bottled water,
Yes. Yeah.
they own everything, and all profit based,
Yeah.
and had influence on that food guide pyramid. So
Yeah. Yeah, they were the
I
ones
can't,
making the guidelines, or at least influencing the guidelines.
that's
And all
right.
they wanted to do is sell Pepsi and Nabisco crackers. So,
Exactly. And
and
Nabisco,
Kellogg's
Nestle,
cereal and General
right,
Mills, all of
right,
them. Yeah, absolutely.
exactly. So can we say, I hate to have that like victim mentality, but we just didn't know better. And if you
No, we
weren't
didn't know better, of
diving
course.
deep, if you weren't
Yeah.
diving deep, which I'll tell you, I wasn't
Right.
in my 20s, um, we believed it. Okay.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely. It was what was told to us. And I do think that it influenced even scientific studies. I mean, the Ansel Keys studies are a great example. I mean, he suppressed evidence. And I mean, like that wasn't released until a few years ago, until like the last decade. That
right.
some of that evidence and some of his studies that he came to the conclusion pointed at fat, where the studies actually supported it was sugar that was more inflammatory towards heart disease. And it's
Mm-hmm.
just like, yeah, I mean, and so I've gotten to this point. And my brain's like, I'm trying not to be a conspiracy theorist,
Same.
but I mean, there's definitely like, some of this evidence, some of the stuff that's put out, even in quote unquote scientific literature, you really have to scrutinize it closely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
it's difficult for me, and I'm a trained physician, and so,
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So you have a strategy, like you have a process that you teach about how to not eat sugar. You have an
Mhm.
approach. I want to hear about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So I have a course. It's a 5-step course. And the first module, we kind of just went over about the history of sugar. And then I have a module about how to shop in the uh,
Mm,
in the grocery store for foods that don't contain added sugar. That's what I'm talking about. Like you said previously, I'm not talking about eating an orange or a banana. I mean, I do talk about that a little bit, but the focus is the processed sugar and the added sugar, right? So
hmm.
I teach people how to shop in the grocery store. I teach people what to look for on a menu when they go out to eat.
Mm.
Um, I also teach what what whole foods we can use to substitute to make our
Oh,
food, sweeter. You're right.
yeah.
If you want to enjoy brownies, or, I give a lot of example, recipes for things that don't contain added sugar. And I mean, and as you know, there are many things like even salad dressings. I have a recipe for a
Ugh.
Greek salad dressing that has lemon and, so you don't need sugar in that. And so simple things like that down to making brownies or pancakes or whatever it is without having added sugar or flour. When I say processed sugar, I mean processed flour as well.
I love that you mean processed flour too. I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the same. Very processed.
Biochemically, it's the same.
Yeah. So, and then I also, I talk a lot, and my favorite part of my whole course is the module where I talk about the brain. And, I've touched on it with you, just the dopamine reward system, and that we can teach, we can learn, we can form new neural pathways. It's that neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And it's quick. It can be in 3 days that your taste can change if you really do, if you really, really can avoid the processed sugar. And
Yeah.
then you form those new neural pathways. You have, and there are so many coaching philosophies in there and just neuroscience philosophies where, and not, it's not a philosophy, it's a tool, to learn how to sit with discomfort so that you can overcome a craving, right? So cravings are a
Yeah.
big part of sugar and anything that activates the dopamine reward system. So I love that module, and everybody can tell because I am so into it. And I even love talking about it because the brain is just where it's at. And the fact that we just have to make a decision to do it, and we can do it, and we can overcome it if we choose to. These are all choices, and you know and learning how to, I think the most exciting thing for me is to be able to have somebody make the realization that they can do it. They can sit with that hunger or that anger or whatever emotion it is that's um, triggering them to want to reach for a processed sugary thing, right? and
Yeah.
and be able to realize that it can be relatively easy to have a whole day and then build on that without having processed sugar involved in what they're consuming. It's
Yeah. And
exciting.
I think that's so huge because so many times this drive, this craving, this urge, this desire, it feels out of us. It feels like something like there's some alien force acting on us. And when we can break it down and show clients that actually this is just neurochemistry, I call it seeing the wizard behind the curtain. Being a Kansas kid, that's what, the wizard behind the curtain. It's really hard to be afraid of the hologram on the wall anymore when you just know it's a man behind the curtain, right? And
Right.
then from that space, it's so liberating, and it's powerful to be a part of, and it's powerful to watch in somebody else's life. It is really amazing. So
It really is. And I've seen it, I think it might be easier for somebody to understand that has some type of scientific background and just be like, oh, wait, hold on. This is just, neurochemicals and I can change this. So, but I've used it, in other areas, like to abstain from alcohol too. Like I'm like,
yeah,
I don't need it. I just made a decision. Like, and I don't judge people. I'm just saying, like, once you realize sometimes just the education can
yeah.
can turn that switch. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we have covered a lot today, and I really am super appreciative of you coming on the podcast and sharing your knowledge base because, like, you're teaching me things, you're teaching the audience things. I have one question for you that I like to ask anybody who comes on the podcast as an expert that comes on the podcast and shares information. What do you feel like is the most important thing? If there was one thing a human could do to improve their health, what would that one thing that you would tell them that would give them the most bang for their buck be?
I mean, I think we've been talking about it for half an hour now. I honestly, I've changed my life by not eating processed sugar. I'll say sugar, meaning flour as well. So I don't know that I can prioritize it over the strength, but I think that's where it starts. For some people is like, I had some autoimmune diseases. I guess I should say I still have them, but I don't have any symptoms of them. And that
I love that.
was a huge change for me when I stopped eating processed sugar. I think that's it.
Yeah. I do too. And I agree. Like, there is the exercise components. As human animals, we are meant to be out and about and moving our bodies, but there's no amount of movement or exercise that undoes a Pop Tart or erases it. So I'm always like, that part still has to go. So I agree. I mean, I always think that that's the biggest thing too, but I like to hear other people's input, and I appreciate that.
I
So
mean, exercise for me is right up there.
yes.
And as you know, I'm certainly, the resistance, it's right up there, but I changed my life. I kind of already had that. So the sugar
Yeah.
thing is huge. So yeah.
Yeah. So how can people get in touch with you if they want to hear more about your programs and hear about more about your coaching?
Well, on LinkedIn, I'm there as Food Fit Doc. I have a website, beforesунrisecoaching.com.
Mm,
And that's how you can get in touch with me.
I love it. I love it. Anything else you want to add before we sign off?
No, I'm just so happy that you had me on. This was really fun. I'm honored to be on the podcast, and you're doing great things.
Oh, well, thank you. The feeling is very mutual. I appreciate that. We're going to sign off. I'll be back next week with another podcast. Talk to you then.